Hi. I'm also have an extension appointment, so I expect to be yelled at as we go along. It's my pleasure to be able to come visit with you today, and I am the thing that separates you from a coffee break, so you better give me your attention or I will drone on forever. So it is my pleasure to be here representing not only myself, but Dr. Lisa Schulte-Moore, who is one of the founding PIs of the Prairie Strips project that I'm going to talk about a little bit more today. And we want to leave you with this message of one of the most powerful tools that we think is in the Iowa toolbox for developing climate-smart ag, and that's putting perennials on the landscape to reintroduce some of the diversity that we've heard some of my other colleagues talk about as important. So what do you see in this picture that I'm showing you? Just shout out. The faster you shout out, the faster we move on. So a stream, I heard a stream. A drainage ditch, okay, that's a slight, yeah, good. All right, so there's strips in here, that's right. So there's a, let's see if I can do this, does that? No, that doesn't work. So there's a strip of prairie in between these blocks of row crop. So this is a place that a farm family has decided to change the configuration of their landscape to add diversity, to make this farmscape more resilient, and I'll hopefully show you later on, more profitable and easier to farm by working around the tough areas. So my next question is for Dan. Thanks for setting this up, Dan. I know you can't see this slide, but does anyone else know what this picture is of? Dust Bowl. The Dust Bowl, yeah. So this is 1935 when Hugh Bennett, the first director of the Soil Conservation Service, timed a presentation to the Senate to coincide with the arrival of a dust storm, our soil, blowing into Washington, D.C. We're basically at the same point today. People just can't see it this dramatically on a camera. Now we show pictures of the Gulf of Mexico, right? But that doesn't show up in a senator's water glass during session. So I bring this up because I want to point out that we created solutions to this problem almost 100 years ago now by putting more roots in the ground, by putting more perennials on the landscape. And I think what I will leave you with, hopefully, is that perennials are essentially to agriculture what exercise is to human beings. It's free, you know how to do it, you know you should do it, and you know it will help solve almost every problem you have. But we don't do it all the time, right? Sometimes it's hard and takes consistent effort. We need some of the structural changes that Mike mentioned to help support our good habits, whether that's exercise or, in this case, the diversification of our landscape with perennials. And as Cynthia pointed out, strategically incorporating perennials into our annual croplands can help us in a lot of different ways. It can help us with farm profit. That's probably one of the first ways people are thinking about this right now. And that change to perennials also helps improve water quality. It can provide renewable energy, and then thereby helping our climate. So this is a picture of me being really mad multiple times during the last growing season when my farm fields got flooded, as Mike was talking about. It's tough to be an ag researcher, heaven forbid, be an ag producer. This is a photo of a Prairie Strips and a family that has put Prairie Strips into their landscape. So what I mean by a Prairie Strip is just that. It's a strip of prairie planted along a hill slope in a farm field. So Rick just described how doing something different on our steepest hill slopes, the ones with maybe a 10% grade, can really have a big impact on reducing erosion. And so this is a situation where this family has decided to put a strip of Iowa's original vegetation, the prairie, what made our soils great, back into their farm field. And now as the water flows down that landscape, it gets stuck basically in the prairie. You know, prairie has thick stems. When water flows through the prairie, it slows down. And it drops everything that's in it. So it drops the soil that's in it, it drops the nutrients that are with that soil, and then the roots that are in the ground in that prairie strip have made little holes that help with the drainage of that water into the farm field, thereby keeping both the water and the nutrients in the farm field. And it's kind of pretty, right? Bugs like it, people like it, everything likes it. And for this reason, Prairie Strips has become increasingly popular in Iowa, where it started, but now spreading widely throughout the Midwest. And this is for very good reason. So here are some of the highlights that were published by Lisa and her colleagues in the Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences a couple years ago that I'm just going to run through. Because what we talked about at the beginning was using our farm dollars, our CRP dollars, most efficiently. Here we're talking about using 10% of a farm field, so think about putting only 10% of a farm field into CRP, our Prairie Strips, which is now covered in the new Farm Bill, but getting these kind of benefits. 10% prairie in your field gets you 37% reduction in water runoff, so 37% less water leaving that field going into the drainage ditch, 95% reduction in sediment loss. That's the soil erosion that Rick was talking about. 10% of your farm field, 95% reduction in sediment loss. 77% reduction in phosphorus runoff with that water. 70% reduction in the nitrogen running off with that water. 70% reduction in subsurface nitrate concentrations in a field that's not tiled. This is actually pretty surprising to us. We didn't expect to see such high reductions in nitrate from some of Mike's work on this project. And more than triple the pollinator and double the bird abundance in these farm fields because of those prairie strips providing food sources and habitat. This happened without a negative impact on the cropland adjacent. So there's a reasonable hypothesis to be made that if you plant a prairie strip, it might grow up into weeds, and those weeds might negatively impact the rest of your farm field. Well, we haven't seen that happen. In fact, there are no additional weed problems, and as Rick just said, we can't make terraces that can handle the kind of rainfall events we have today. So our terraces are designed for 2-inch rainfalls. Now we consistently get 5-inch rainfalls. Really, the only thing that can handle those sort of rainfall events are prairie roots or perennial roots. If you think about a perennial root system, how many of you ever had to dig up irises at your house? Anybody have irises? Have you ever had to dig them up? Matt? Is it pretty fun? Deep. They're deep, right? Those roots act basically like rebar in concrete. Stuff doesn't move throughout them. So that's way more effective than moving dirt with a bulldozer every year. So using prairie strips is actually much cheaper than installing terraces the way we've been doing it. So it's not just in strips in our fields that perennials can be really helpful. The Prairie Strips project has helped us realize how impactful reincorporating perennials in Iowa can be, but this is the reality of a lot of farm fields today, right? They're not these tidy squares. There are places that are really wet, and what we're seeing increasingly is the value of identifying some places in your field that might be better off in a perennial crop. So Mike mentioned that some places we should intensify grain production and some places we should abandon grain production. So this is a picture I am using as an example from a farmer that called me this fall asking how he could put perennials into the center of his farm fields because he was tired of losing tractors there. He literally wants to do what happened with the Aztecs in Mexico City, right? They used grass on an old lake bed to make a strong foundation that we still have a city of 10 million people on today. He just wants perennials in the middle of his field so he can drive through his field in the spring simply to access the other parts of the field. So we can think about using perennials as tools that help us bridge this transition between a changing climate and managing our grain crops today, but we can also think about perennial crops just themselves. And Rick mentioned switchgrass, so I'm going to talk a little bit about switchgrass as well. Switchgrass is a native prairie grass. It's one of the big ones that made the tall grass prairie. And this is a picture of switchgrass, sorry, it's real small, from one of my farm fields at Iowa State in March. So I don't know if you remember the pictures Rick just showed, but he showed you a bare field in March and the amount of water and soil that was leaving that field just from snowmelt, I'm guessing, in an Iowa winter. This is what switchgrass looks like in March. It's nice and green still. You can still see the corn stubble behind it. It's adapted to Iowa and it provides year-long cover to intercept that rainfall and snow. These are what the roots look like on switchgrass compared to a wheat plant. So our prairie plants have deeper, more abundant roots. That's that rebar that's going deep. They're also making deep channels that feed the microbes carbon that they take from the air to make those healthy nutrient cycling systems that Mike talked about. And then importantly, you can do almost anything with perennial crops. I work particularly on perennial grasses, and you can use perennial grasses for forage, for renewable energy, and that's my focus, but also for products that support food industry. So this is a picture of from my colleague Kelly Tiller's company, Genera Energy in Tennessee. They now use switchgrass pulp to make egg cartons. What's the biggest egg-producing state in the country? Wouldn't it be cool if we grew the cartons here too? Wouldn't be that hard. So we've talked a lot in Iowa about voluntary practices to reduce nitrate and phosphorus in our water, but we really don't talk about perennials. that much, even though the Iowa Nutrient Reduction Strategy identifies perennials as the most efficacious way to improve our water quality. As everyone on this panel has talked about, it is getting hard to manage a farm system in a timely manner to do the right thing at the right time. It's just, you only have 3 or 4 days now. Perennials are one way that we can set something in the ground year-round that when we know will protect our water, we know will protect our soil, and we don't have to do anything. It's the lazy person's way to a healthier ecosystem. So I'd like us to see us think more about how we can incentivize what we know to be the most effective way to protect our soil and water resources, perennials. And so I'd like to just show you what this looks like in action. So Rick wasn't able to show you the total amounts of nutrients or soil lost from a no-till system, but this is some photographic evidence from the Prairie Strips project that was done down at the Neil Smith Wildlife Refuge. And on the left panel, you see the bottom of a little catchment, the bottom of a little waterway, or water area. And that field was an 100% no-till crop. And I hope you can see the amount of sediment that's in that flume. So that's with no-till agriculture. In the middle here, we have something that had a 10% prairie strip put in. Still a lot of sediment in the basin, but the water coming out the bottom is pretty clear. And then on the right is, of course, what we had in Iowa 150 years ago, 200 years ago at this point, with 100% prairie. That's what made our clean water resources that we have. So how can we think about putting perennials on the landscape in a way that makes money, or at least doesn't lose money? So this is a part of an analysis that we did using the idea of do no harm, do no economic harm. We asked where in Iowa are corn and soybeans not profitable today? And we actually asked this during some pretty profitable years like 2008 through 2014. And we found that within fields, there are always spots that are losing money. And in fact, if we found that if we put switchgrass on those places of fields that consistently were losing $100 per hectare, about a little less than about $40 an acre, and leaching 50 kilograms of nitrogen, so we just took the places that weren't making money and we knew were sort of egregiously leaching nitrogen, we reduced our statewide nitrate loss by 18%. Does anyone remember how much we're supposed to reduce nitrogen in Iowa to meet the Iowa Nutrient Reduction Strategy? Jackie, you know this. 40%. So by only targeting places and fields that were never making money, we reduced our nitrate by 18%. If we really wanted to try to get closer to that nutrient reduction strategy target of 40%, we just took out the areas of the field that weren't making any money, not losing $100 per acre, and we found that we could reduce our statewide nitrate leaching 38%, so almost to that 40% goal by doing nothing except helping to protect the investment that farmers already have. So when we asked this, so how much of Iowa land is really always losing money? Iowa's got great farmland. It's great in corn and soybeans. We're set up to do corn and soybeans. We found that it's really every year, over a 20-year period, about less than 5% of Iowa farmland loses money every single year over the 20-year period that we looked at. But in some places, that really added up. So I'm showing you a few counties here, Clayton County, Powesheik County, and Harrison County. And there are places in those counties where we know we could drill down, and if we put perennials on the landscape, we could not only really improve the water quality in those places, but we could make those counties a lot more money. So in some cases, this is looking at the increased value over corn and soybean over a 10-year period in these counties. So how much more money would people make if they were growing switchgrass, not corn and soy? And it's $16, $20, $47 million. That's equivalent to at least the busing costs in those counties. So these numbers have real value to the people who live in these counties. And so I want to just leave you with the idea that people want to know more about this. People in Iowa are ready to learn more about this. This is some data from the Iowa Learning Farm asking about if people have heard of Prairie Strips, if they want to learn more, and if they want Prairie Strips on their farm. And this is after only a couple years of doing Prairie Strips research. And after just a few years, more than half of the people had heard of Prairie Strips, and about 20% wanted to learn more or wanted them on their farm. So people are ready. The time is right. Thanks.
Okay, thank you all. Terrific panel. Lots of information to think about. Questions? I have a couple, but we got plenty in the audience. Please.
Yeah, a lot of discussion about resilience, which is absolutely. Oh, sure. A lot of discussion. Can people? Okay, there it is. A lot of discussion about resilience, which is absolutely critical. But what are the opportunities, particularly Emily, on those lands where they're not that productive? What are the opportunities for mitigation and participating in emerging carbon markets and things like that? What are the opportunities that you're seeing at Iowa State that might provide additional revenue, not just protection for resiliency, but actual new revenue for mitigation?
So Emily, and then if others want to try that too.
How do I turn these on?
Do they speak?
You're on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great question, Matt. So right now, everything's in terms of potential, right? The markets for carbon, the markets for nutrient trading schemes, none of those are there today for farmers, but everybody's looking for them. So certainly what we found at Iowa State through my colleagues' work, my work, is that we are able to use changes in land management to make significant and quantifiable changes in carbon removed from the atmosphere and stored in soils, and understand how much nitrogen is retained in fields or leaves fields. So we are now at a point where we could be monitoring and monetizing these nutrients, whether it's carbon, whether it's nitrogen, but there's a lot of work that still needs to be done to put the structures that allow farmers to easily jump into those markets. There's a lot of work left to be done to put those structures in place.
Others who want to respond? Okay, other questions?
Yes, this is again for Dr. Heaton. The prairie strips are very intriguing. We have one farm that's got some B slopes on that certain particular soil types we'll see a little bit of movement. Narrow prairie strip running, perpendicular to your direction of travel. Look like they're about 15 foot wide, roughly, in your diagram or your photo on the slide. Two questions. Number one, during the establishment process, what is the interaction between the pre-emergent crop chemicals that are used up soil from the habitat? And number two, for those of us that have pattern tile drainage systems, what's the concern for prairie strips in the root systems getting into tile drainage?
Okay, so these are some pretty focused agronomic questions, and where's Jay Harmon? Is he still in here? Oh, I see you not raising your hand. So I'll also turn towards some of the ag engineers in the room that might be able to help answer these questions. But the first question, first let me say that when you decide you want to put prairie strips on your farm, it's the configuration of where you put prairie and how wide the strips are is determined by the configuration of your land. So it takes a few consultations first to figure out what width of strip is needed to intercept the flow that you have coming down your field. So every field's different. And then you're right, there are some interactions to be taken into account with herbicide, making sure you're not preventing the emergence of the prairie strips that you plant. I think it's just good management and trying to spray carefully around areas of the strip. And you're sitting next to Mark Lipt, our cropping system agronomist, who can answer a lot of those herbicide questions for you. And then remind me what the last question was.
Tile drainage.
Yeah, so the tile drainage, that's why I was looking at Jay. So there have been some cases where there's been some concerns that prairie roots have gotten into tile drainage, and the Ag Engineering Department, Matt Helmers, has taken cameras out and gone through tiles, and it wasn't clear that it was anything from the prairie. So there have been times where we think there might have been some roots in the tile, but it's not widespread and it's not been clearly shown.
Other questions?
Yes, this is for Mike. You indicated the need for additional drainage to take care of a lot of the problems that we have with the huge rain events that Rick talked about. We had some time ago the Iowa plan that was going to increase our tile drainage to 9 or 12 inches, but we didn't have adequate wetlands at the bottom of those. Can you envision redoing our tile drainage that would also end up with enough wetland that would also end up being kind of irrigation ponds that would handle a 6 or 8 or 10 inch rain event?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So let me address that in a couple of ways. So to be more specific about the need for drainage updates in the state, really it's a need for a greater intensity. So that's a rate of drainage, not necessarily a total amount of drainage. In fact, the amount is not really important. It's the rate, so you can get out there into the field again. And I want to make that distinction because it's the amount of water that drains that is associated with nutrient leaching, not the rate. So that's an important aspect of that. There's a way to deal with that, and one way to deal with that is to make the drain shallower and narrower in spacing. And obviously, this creates an added cost to the system on one hand. On the other hand, it increases the intensity, the rate of drainage, without increasing the total amount of water that leaves the field, which helps ameliorate some of the nutrient concerns. It also allows us to better site those wetlands. More wetlands could be put on the landscape with a shallower drainage system. Obviously, that would be a major infrastructure overhaul. But there are drainage districts that are going to need major overhauls likely in the state. And I'm familiar with a few districts that are putting in new mains and field tiles. And so I think there are some opportunities out there that should be considered.
Question for Mike on drainage. Can a successful cover crop establishment change the rate of drainage in an existing system?
I think that's a very likely possibility. Certainly we know cover crops can increase infiltration rate, they can increase soil structure, and in theory then should improve drainage. Whether that's enough to make a planned adjustment in the spacing and depth of your drainage to alter the intensity, I don't know the answer to that.
So this is more of a general question for everyone, and even bouncing off of something that Dean Robeson said, that terms like climate change are not political, that we're just talking about the science. But as a linguistical anthropologist, I would say that language is impacted, and the language we use matters. And when I look around the room to see who's here, and when I even heard some comments that this is an urban-rural partnership. In order to achieve some of these incredible investments that we're going to have to make in infrastructure, it is not just an agricultural investment, right? It's going to take the urban people, it's going to take all the taxpayers, it's going to be beyond Iowa to make all this happen. The state of Iowa in and of itself is probably not capable. But it seems to me that we have a language issue when it comes to climate change. We have so many different understandings, and it is politically loaded, even though it should not be. And I think we ignore those issues at our peril, because those are going to be the things that are the barrier to us accomplishing anything, even among agricultural groups. I would guess we've got the choir in the room here, hopefully some people who are agreeing to the language that we're using today, but there's a whole bunch of other farmers that have not bought in yet. Would people agree with that? Yes. So we got to think about our language, and maybe another forum after this one, because this one's great. I've been enjoying learning what I'm learning. Get some people with some different diversity backgrounds who can talk about the language, can talk about the social psychology of what's going on. We're not getting all the scientific voices we need at the table to help us solve these problems, and we hardly ever do, even though we've got Lois up next. We ignore the social side of this more than we care to, because it's easier to discuss the agronomic and the water quality and the drainage and the climate. So that's all I'm saying, is encouraging as we go forward. Hopefully this is a series that you'll be doing, and let's get some other people to the table. And all of you agronomists, show up when the language people are talking, so that we're not in our silos.
Fair enough. Question in the back.
Just a response from a farmer. I don't think the farmers deny that climate is changing. We see it, we live it, lot of the concern in language is whose fault is it, or is it something that we as people have caused, or is it a natural, environmental aspect? I think that's where the difference in opinion comes from. Farmers, I think, understand climate's changing. We're trying to figure out how to farm in this changing climate. What can we do in our operation to mitigate and make our systems more resilient? When I was a kid, it seemed like we had all spring to plant, we had all summer to cultivate and bale hay and play baseball, and we had all fall to harvest and fall plow. And I can't put 20 days together in a whole year to get both planting and harvesting done anymore without, dealing with excess water. So, we need to have help in deciding how to equip, how to get things done better, how to make our soil more resilient, and how to still produce crops profitably. We're in a real tight cost squeeze right now with high cost land and high cost inputs and extremely high amount of rain, and trying to come away with a crop that's paltry in price.
So that's a great comment for us to close this session on. I do think these last few comments about the intersection of science and technology with public policy, with language, with decision making, with how people who live on the landscape adopt new practices is highly relevant, and we need to think about that as well. And the question of who pays matters also. There have been a couple of references today to the Great Dust Bowl and the emergence of the Soil Conservation Service, which today we call it the NRCS. And before the SCS existed, nobody had to pay for that. It's been a wonderful agency. It has helped us greatly on the landscape, and we pay for that now with our tax dollars because there was a need to do so, right? So when we think about new policy, new process, new ways in which we can do a better job managing our landscape, we do have to broaden the conversation and begin thinking about how these things get implemented, who pays for what and how, and so on. So help me thank our panelists. We're going to take a short break, and everybody... We've stolen 4 minutes of your break time. Please try to be back by 3 o'clock so we can get to the next panel. Thanks so much.